Welcome to the Low Carb Conferences podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jeff Gerber. Our special guest today is Amy Berger, who will be speaking at our conference in February next year. How are you today, Amy?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for being here. So Amy is a U.S. Air Force veteran and has a master's degree in human nutrition and also is a certified nutrition specialist. She's an author, writer, speaker, nutrition consultant, and active on her blog and social media. For the past 15 years, Amy has developed an interest in low-carb and keto diets, both personally and professionally, using these nutritional approaches with her clients to address health and medical conditions. I've heard Amy speak on several occasions, and it's really her knowledge, charisma, energy, and passion that captures your attention when she's speaking at conferences. So Amy, if you can provide a little more background and share with us your personal and professional interests.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And thank you for that lovely introduction. I am a low carb and ketogenic oriented nutritionist and writer. And for anyone that doesn't know my story, the real quick version is I got into this the way a lot of other people do. I used to be heavier, and I was a career changer. I became a nutritionist after having my own transformation with a low carb diet. And I got into this quite a while back with the Atkins diet. That was the way I got into it all. And after years and years of doing what I thought were all the right things, following what I thought was a healthy diet, and I was getting plenty of exercise and I just couldn't lose weight. And low carb did the trick for me. And I was just so fascinated by it and so interested in, why is this working? I'm doing the opposite of what I thought I was supposed to do, and now it's working. And so I went back to school for nutrition, and I've mentioned elsewhere that at this point, even though I got into this personally for weight loss initially, the power of this way of eating and what you can do is so amazing and so astounding that weight loss is almost one of the least impressive things that happens. And not to downplay that. I mean, that can be life-changing for people, but you can completely reverse type 2 diabetes, normalize your hormones if you have PCOS, people get rid of migraines, heartburn. It's just, there's no drug out there. There's no other approach out there that works so well for as many things as just cutting the carbs.
Yes, certainly, Amy. And so many of us have a similar story that it was self-discovery, but you certainly made a career out of it. And I know that you have touched on areas. You wrote a book on Alzheimer's disease, and the recent book, End Your Carb Confusion. You might want to comment on what the specifics you're addressing there. And your talk next year is going to be on thyroid and diet and health. And you mentioned that you'll be writing a book on that as well.
Yeah, so my most recent book is End Your Carb Confusion, and I had the phenomenal honor to write that with Dr. Eric Westman, who you've known a long time, very well known in the low carb world. And I think that Dr. Westman and I wrote the book that we would want to have if we were brand new to all of this. When you've been at low carb such a long time, when we all got started, it was so much easier because there was a lot less information. And you would think having less information would make it more difficult, but there was actually less misinformation and less confusing and conflicting information. So I think we tried to put together the plainest English, most common sense, straightforward way to do a low carb or keto diet, how and why to do it, and how to do it without going bankrupt and without managing 100 different aspects of your life to fit into your diet. It's really I don't envy people that are new to this now, because if I were new myself, I would have no idea where to even start. So I think we wrote End Your Carb Confusion to be that sort of really solid starting place. And then, yeah, my newest passion is thyroid. And I think it's going to be a while before my next book is out, but my next book I almost want to call it End Your Thyroid Confusion, but very, I'm just very passionate. I've been through hypothyroidism myself, and a lot of clients come to me, people come to me because they need help, because just keto out of the box isn't working. Something's getting in the way. And very often that's undiagnosed, or in my opinion, improperly treated hypothyroidism. If your thyroid hormones are not where they need to be, you're going to have a really hard time losing weight, even on a good low carb or keto diet.
Great, Amy. Well, we'll maybe get into the thyroid stuff in a few minutes, but backing up a little bit, I've been involved with nutrition and low carb for almost 25 years. And actually, as Eric Westman and I go way back, and Eric had the opportunity, he actually I think he met with Dr. Atkins, and also worked with Jackie Eberstein, who's been very active in the low carb community. And you're right, it was very simple that back then. And the first person I ever reached out to in social media was Jackie Eberstein. And my hands were shaking. I was typing her an email, and I'm like, she's not going to reply to me. She worked with Dr. Atkins. And she got right back to me. And this is back in the year 2000. This is how far it goes back for me.
Yeah.
And I only bring this up because I often challenge Jackie, because I said, Jackie, how do you address each individual patient? I mean, do you just throw low carb at them? Does one diet fit all? And she would just say, low carb, low carb, low carb. And you have a practice, or you have a group of clients that you're addressing diet with. And me as a physician, I deal with clients and patients every single day. And so what I've found over the years is that we have insulin sensitive individuals that really don't have an insulin problem, and they still have weight loss, or they still have metabolic health issues. And then we have insulin resistant individuals who are, almost full blown diabetic, and we really can't throw the same diet at them. And so my question is, what is your approach to the different individuals that you see?
Yeah, it's most people who come to me come because they want to do a low carb or keto diet, or they're already doing it and they just need help. But I've had, obviously I think that's a really effective approach for so many people, but I have had clients who I recommended to eat more carbohydrate, not a ton, not 200 or 300 grams a day, but people that were following very, very strict ketogenic diets, who didn't really need to be, based on their situation, and who were not feeling well. And again, not that keto was harmful for them, but for their individual circumstances, they didn't need a medical ketogenic diet. They didn't need to eat like a child with epilepsy. Some of them a little bit more starch, just a little bit, and they just feel better. So it really, I would say everything is individualized, but most of what I do, and just about everyone who comes to me, is getting some variation of carbohydrate restriction. Some people really need keto. Some people can just kind of be low carb. It really depends. And that's why I get very frustrated sometimes on social media when people kind of give these blanket recommendations without knowing the details of somebody's situation.
Yeah. Well, what we do in our office is we measure for insulin resistance. We do the 2-hour glucose challenge, and we measure
Mhm.
insulin. And so typically we find a lot of people that are insulin resistant, and the majority of the population are, as you know. And so that's why a low carb or keto diet could be most effective. But then we also find individuals that are insulin sensitive, and they'll hit weight loss plateaus that if you put them on a really high fat diet, that they'll very easily hit plateaus, and they're frustrated. And so maybe I'm a bit of a maverick over the years, because I've been doing this now for almost 25 years, and I've seen success and failures. And, one of the aspects of our conference is where is nutrition headed? And we're trying to get some different perspectives next year, maybe to confuse people, but hopefully not. But I just throw that out because I really think that it's an important aspect to consider people individually, in that you just can't throw a keto diet at them.
Yeah, I don't think, I mean, I would hope it's not confusing, but everything is so polarized, right? And the thing is, it shouldn't be that difficult for us to understand that some people do really well on a very low carb diet, and some people don't. And that's not to say that some people can't do it. Everyone can do a low carb or ketogenic diet. Not everybody needs to, and not everyone is going to feel their best, I think. If like you said, if they're insulin sensitive, they don't really need to be ultra low carb. And I think it's Jeff Volek who says it's either 20 or 30% of people can eat anything and they'll be healthy, they'll be lean and fit. And then there's the rest of us who can't eat just anything we want. So that there are going to be some people who any way of eating will work fine for them.
Yeah. So social media is very polarized, unfortunately, but look, that's the way it is. People get on a platform and they make statements to grab your attention. And so that's why for myself, I try to get off of social media and just help people. But the idea is how do we deal with the polarization? Because really, my goal is for us all to come together and have some common themes, and for people to really understand that nutrition isn't social media driven.
Yeah, I don't know what the answer to that is. I think it's human nature. People want there to be one path. Oh, just do this thing or listen to this one person. And I just don't think it works that way. I wish it did, but I don't, it's not all. Now I do think, I wholeheartedly embrace the idea of bio-individuality, and we all do have different histories, different genetic makeups, but we all are humans. I think physiologically, we all have a lot more in common than we have different. So I think there are some basic principles like getting adequate protein, if not erring on the higher side of protein, not eating a ton of sugar, get rid of the obvious junk in the diet. And then we can debate about, the finer points. But I think there's some large principles that are a good starting point for everybody, and then you have to individualize beyond that.
Sure. Well, we hope that the conferences can kind of tease that out. So another aspect of this I always like to ask is, how does the quantity of the food or the calories play into low carb as you see it?
Oh, this this is such a question. I hate the C word. I think we all hate that C word. I do think it is possible to eat too much, right? Too many calories, if that's how we want to define it, because we all know plenty of people who go on a low carb diet and don't lose much weight. Maybe they get that initial drop of water weight or something, but they really don't lose like we would expect. And it is possible to eat more than your body needs. I think keeping your blood sugar steady helps control that sort of ravenous hunger. I think that's pretty universal. Most of us find that we are less hungry, and when we are hungry, it's less often throughout the day, but that doesn't mean that it's impossible to still overeat, to eat more than we need. And it's some of that comes from, I think, just the misguided information, where some people think that they're supposed to, eat as much fat as possible, add butter to everything, melt cheese on everything. And again, that works for some people, but there's a lot of people for whom that ultra high fat approach doesn't work. And I think if we're going to talk about calories, it is definitely possible to eat too much on a keto diet. And I will say, though, I think there's not enough literature out there on this yet, but I think there does, I will stand up for this. There does seem to be what Dr. Atkins called a metabolic advantage, right? A slight edge where isocalorically, if you eat the same amount of food, the same calories, if you are on a low carb or ketogenic diet, you will lose more fat than somebody eating the same calories, the same food energy from higher carbohydrate. Um, I, I just, I think we've seen it too many times to deny that that happens. It may not be an advantage of hundreds or thousands of calories a day, but there seems to be something about being on a lower carbohydrate diet that makes the body, I want to say it makes the body more efficient, but if you're burning more energy, on a physics basis, it's actually less efficient because you are burning through more energy. But if you're trying to lose weight, that's a good thing.
Yeah, so the metabolic advantage, there's study after study that really demonstrates that. David Ludwig has really devoted years of research to showing that there's a slight metabolic advantage, and I think it's a hormonal basis, and in a sense, you end up burning more energy, losing more fat on a low carb diet. Now, we find that to be more of a case when you're more on the insulin resistant side. But, what we have found over the years is that patients who do very well on low carb ketogenic diets, they lose weight, there's less of them, and they end up eating less. And so, the point that we want to make is that the focus is on the satiety or the sense of being full, finding foods that fill you up, rather than, the old school where you're focusing on eating less and exercising more, because that old approach is deprivation. And so, that's the real big difference. But on the low carb side of things, we do want to make patients aware that they're eating less long term.
Yeah, no, I think that is true, because even if it is about caloric intake, okay, if the bottom line is that you have to eat less to lose weight, well, then we have to find a way where it's easy to eat less, where you don't have to, like you said, there's no deprivation. You don't have to force yourself to go hungry all day. And I think, Dr. Westman always jokes, well, there's no studies on this, but, most of us know we're just so much less hungry. And if we eat less on a low carb or keto diet, it's because we are simply not as hungry. There's no force involved. There's no deliberate hunger involved. Like, we're not white knuckling through hunger and cravings all day. We eat less because we are perfectly satisfied with less. So, and that's a big difference. And I think that also may have to do with how, like Dr. Ludwig's research also shows that over the long term, the metabolic slowdown, when people lose weight, the metabolic rate tends to slow a little bit. And that happens less on a lower carbohydrate diet compared to a higher carb diet or a lower fat diet. And I think that's probably all connected somehow. Like, I just think, okay, both results have you eating less, but in one, you're miserable, you're cranky, you're hungry, you're uncomfortable. And with the other one, you're eating less, but you feel great you're not forcing yourself to eat less. It's happening spontaneously.
Yeah, absolutely. So you look, we're on the same page on this, and I think it's just a matter of looking at somebody's metabolic health and finding a combination of macronutrients that are going to satisfy the appetite rather, and focus on well-being, and rather than deprivation. That's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, because even if the deprivation works, how long can you keep that up? Can you do that for a year, 5 years, 10 years? Like, how, you got to make it something you can actually do, or that way it's going to come back. We see that all the time.
Yeah. So mindfulness comes into this. To me, I love that term because I talk to my patients about it all the time. Another aspect of this is skipping meals or intermittent fasting. We have patients that are real fond of intermittent fasting, and they come in and they brag, "I'm not eating." I think it's hysterical. My patients are so proud of themselves. And I said, look, you can, I think it extending the time of day that you're not eating seems to make a lot of metabolic sense, but is it a sustainable thing? And we have to discuss that with them. Some of them actually are real good. They'll eat once a day, and maybe once a month they'll go for longer periods of time. And for that, it seems to be sustainable and working for them. What do you think about the intermittent fasting aspect?
Um, I prefer for people to skip a meal here and there, again, because they're just not hungry. I don't like for someone to sort of impose these rules. I'm not allowed to eat until 2 p.m. or it's 7 p.m. I'm not allowed to eat anymore. Like, if you're genuinely hungry, eat. I don't like for people to really deprive themselves. Um, I don't I don't think it's problematic that much physically. I'm more concerned. I see the psychological stuff that starts to happen where people just become almost afraid to eat, like afraid to mix it up. Like it's okay. Let's say Monday to Friday you have a certain schedule because of your work routine or something. It's okay to do things differently on Saturday and Sunday. Or I just see it becoming almost like people think they're doing something wrong if they have 2 meals a day or 3 meals a day instead of only 1. And, I but it can be very helpful, especially for the people that have binge tendencies and food addiction tendencies. If putting a certain sort of wall up, like, "Hey, at 8 p.m., that's it. I don't care how hungry I am, I'm done eating for the day," that can help. But I also think that, I just would prefer for people to skip a meal here and there because they're not hungry and not because they think they need to, or they're paying some kind of penance for, like, "Oh, I ate carbs yesterday, I better fast today to make up for it." And then something that a lot of people don't realize, and I'm not bad mouthing fasting. If it works for people, do it. But most of the benefits that come from fasting, you're already getting on a very low carb diet anyway. If the main goal is to keep the blood sugar kind of low normal, keep the insulin low normal, stay in a fat burning state, that's happening on a very low carb diet, even if you don't fast.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Well, look, we have, we don't want to force that on individuals, and it's the same thing. It brings us back to deprivation. Okay, so now you have this new thing that you're going to not eat, and you're depriving themselves. So I tell people, look, again, it's this mindfulness aspect, and so you eat when you're hungry, and you don't eat when you're not hungry. And if you want to try to skip meals, just pay attention to how your body feels, than forcing it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, I will say one of the nice things to come out of that sort of fasting approach is that it is teaching people that you don't you don't have to eat just because other people around you are eating. But you don't have to deliberately fast. You can just say, "Well, I'm not hungry, so just because it's lunchtime doesn't mean I have to eat." And that's, so many people were raised, "Oh, 3 meals a day, and you have to eat as soon as you wake up." So it's nice to learn, "Oh, I don't actually have to have any specific number of meals a day or eat this many hours." But it really, like, it's another one of those individual situation things, because it can be really helpful, and then I've seen it backfire, more so, like I said, psychologically and emotionally than physically.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So there's individuals where skipping meals just doesn't work. So again, you have to tailor it to the individual.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's get into thyroid a little bit and share your thoughts on that.
Well, I'm before. Can I ask you a question before we do that? Because I'm curious. You do. the glucose tolerance test with insulin. How often do you identify the people where the blood sugar is normal, maybe even the A1C is normal, but you see that really high insulin? Because that's just a huge topic, I think.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and we see it quite a bit. And we're not surprised by it anymore. And that was the whole point. Dr. Joseph Kraft, he invented the insulin assay, and we do a shorter version of it where we do fasting insulin and then 2-hour insulin after glucose challenge. And we've had patients where the A1C is fairly normal, their fasting glucose isn't really that high, their lipids aren't that far off, but you might see a low HDL and a high triglyceride, which is a sign of insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome. And then you do the glucose challenge, and the glucose doesn't even bump up that high. And so a 1 hour over 155 on the glucose, anything over that is, we call that abnormal. A 2 hour over 140 is abnormal. So, but we'll see normal numbers. And then the 2-hour insulin, we use a cutoff. Anything under 30 is normal, between 30 and 40 on the insulin level is borderline, and anything over 40 is really diagnostic of hyperinsulinemia or insulin resistance. And we've had situations where the 2-hour insulin can be 200, 300, 500. We have that all documented. So it's just a great test to figure out there's a problem by 10 to 20 years before you develop diabetes.
Yeah, that's what I suspect. And in those people, do you find that the fasting insulin is elevated, or the fasting insulin is still normal a lot of that time?
So it's variable, but and again, a great question. I'm trying to think back to individuals. You probably, the ones where it really shoots up, I recall that the fasting insulin, can be really high. So, fasting insulin, we use under 10 as a normal result. And so again, it's variable, but again, most healthcare practitioners never even bother with fasting insulins. It's not even in the guidelines. And if we talk to the endocrinologist, we've sent patients on, he says, why did you do insulin levels?
They don't know. I don't know how long it's going to take for that. I mean, I am not a physician, but I think that fasting insulin should be a routine part of a checkup, just like the glucose is. Even knowing it's a little volatile, and you wouldn't diagnose anything off of one measurement anyway, but I can't believe that's just not a standard thing.
Right. So yeah, it's something that we do all the time in our office, and we have a wonderful nurse practitioner who's new out of school working with us, and she's learning the ropes, and understands the importance at screening for insulin resistance early on. Because again, it's affecting over 2/3 of our population. And this is, again, why the focus should be simply on cleaning up diets, cutting back on carbs. If we could get that into the nutrition guidelines, that would really be pushing us in the right direction.
I agree.
So
But
that's
if
where
I to pick up on the thyroid thing, with when I get a client who, and like I said, most people who come to me are already doing a low carb or keto diet. And I can kind of tell from their lab work, their A1C is maybe 4.9 or 5.2. Fasting glucose looks great. Triglycerides are low. Everything looks great. And they cannot lose weight. So metabolically, I can sort of tell, okay, they're sticking to low carb, because this profile really is indicative of someone who's eating a low carb diet, and they're just still heavy. And most of the time they'll have some other classic thyroid symptoms too. They might actually be on an antidepressant medication. They might be on a statin drug. The constipation, the hair loss, all these things. And so that's how I know, unfortunately, keto does not fix everything. We wish it did, right? But sometimes people still have issues, and I see this thyroid stuff all the time. It's really, again, somebody's really sticking to the diet. and the blood work kind of shows that they're sticking to it, and the weight will not budge. And sometimes they may not know they have a thyroid issue, or they're already taking thyroid medicine, but they're taking the levothyroxine, the Synthroid, and it's not doing the job.
Right. So you're saying there's a problem with conversion?
Yes, and I think that's very, very common. Now, for some people, that Synthroid or T4 works great and it's fine. There's a lot of people for whom it doesn't. And they're taking, for anyone listening or watching that isn't familiar, you're taking the one hormone, but your body has to convert that into the active form. Some papers even call T4 the inactive thyroid hormone, and your body has to convert it into the T3. And for whatever reason, some people's bodies just do not do that all that well.
Right. So maybe you could talk about some of the advanced thyroid tests that you're interested in looking at. And is this a subclinical thyroid condition, or is this overt hypothyroidism that we're talking about?
Yeah, it depends. In most cases, most of what I see, I would call it like a subclinical, because in classical hypothyroidism, the TSH test is enough because TSH will be elevated. And so the TSH comes from your pituitary gland. It's not even a thyroid hormone at all. It tells your thyroid to make some hormone. And theoretically, if your thyroid hormone is low, the TSH is going to elevate in order to stimulate that thyroid to get going. But so often the TSH is normal. And so a doctor who's only testing the TSH, which that's the most common test, is just the TSH. If the TSH is normal, it's assumed that everything's fine, because if it wasn't fine, the TSH would be high. But that's just not the case. There's so many people whose TSH is normal, but if you would dig deeper and measure the T4, or most especially the T3, specifically the free T3, it's either overtly low or at the low end of the range. And the range itself is problematic because it's kind of like with insulin. You were saying in your practice, you kind of make 10 the cutoff for fasting insulin. Most labs will put the cutoff at 20 or 24. So you think that there's an optimal range. And I think the same is true of certain thyroid hormones, where here's the reference range or the normal range. But in order for somebody to feel their best, that range should be a little bit, if they're at the very low end of the range and they have symptoms screaming off the charts, but biologically they're low, because it's really difficult to do thyroid testing, because even the blood levels are only a second best. So even if somebody does order beyond the basic TSH and they're doing this more advanced testing, we still only have the blood levels. And thyroid hormone doesn't do anything in the blood. It has to get into the cells, right? But we don't have a good way of measuring how much of this is getting into your cell. So it's really just, it's worth doing, of course. I mean, you want to get those levels tested, but even that the level on the lab printout doesn't tell you how the human being in front of you actually feels. And so I wish that more doctors would go by symptoms, and I mean, use the labs as a guide. I'm not going to say to ignore the labs, but I just think that it's far more important how somebody feels than those numbers.
Yeah. So the idea, if somebody does have, say, a subclinical hypothyroid, that you would replace it with levothyroxine and with the T4 and liothyronine, which is the T3. So that's kind of the direction where you would head with these types of patients.
If they need it. Yeah, I mean, the ones who respond just to the T4, that's great. But I just think there's a lot of people who need the T3. They've been taking T4 for years and they don't feel any different.
Yeah. Do you have prescriptive authority?
I wish. No, all I can do. So that's why I'm hoping to get the word out in Denver, because I know there'll be lots of doctors and PAs and nurse practitioners in the audience. all I can really do is give my clients information. And they, in most states in the US, they can get the blood work done on their own, but then they still have to work with a doctor or someone with prescribing authority to get medication if they need it. And I'm thinking about going to PA school. I don't know if that's ever going to happen or not, but for that exact reason, I'm so tired of having to ask your doctor about such and such, because I see I see this all the time, and I'm just starting to put my talk together for Denver. And one of the things I'm thinking of conveying to the audience, especially the professionals, is, you all have kind of come to accept that the conventional treatment for diabetes is just in the dark ages. I mean, it's backward completely. And if you think that's the dark ages, wait till you see the thyroid testing and treatment. And I know you all have patients and clients like I do, where it's a mystery as to why they're not losing weight. Sometimes they're just not sticking to the diet, and that's a separate issue. But when they really are, and they are working really hard, and the weight is not budging, I think there's a lot of undiagnosed and improperly treated thyroid stuff.
Yeah. So I asked the question because you have I guess you have an online community of clients. I don't know if they're local, but do you have resources in terms of, referring them to healthcare professionals with prescriptive authority that will address these more subtle issues?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to let's get the word out. I'm trying to grow a referral network specifically of MDs, DOs, naturopaths, nurse practitioners that are familiar with this more advanced, more nuanced, not only testing, but interpretation of the tests. Again, they really have to appreciate that it's not enough to fall within that normal range. It's where are you in the range and what are your symptoms? I only know of very few that are friendly to this approach.
Sure.
There's some listings online. I don't know how reliable they are, but yeah, all I can do is refer out. But are you, if you're in the Obesity Medicine Association, I know at least that organization is a little more savvy with this stuff, because you will have come across that many more people with low thyroid, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think, like you said, physicians, naturopaths, functional medicine are all sensitive to this. And it's an important topic because it's part of the multiple endocrine system. So they tend to ride along that if you have a problem with the pancreas and insulin, and that's a hormone, that's a hormonal gland, and then you have the thyroid gland, and frequently they ride together. So certainly you have to address thyroid health when you have patients coming in with metabolic illness. And sometimes the findings can be surprising, uh, or we expected to find a thyroid condition. And I know there's been some debate back and forth, and that's not really what we're talking about, that the low carb diet causes a thyroid condition. And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's a lot of debate about this. One thing I will say is that specifically for cases of Hashimoto's disease, which is not really a thyroid, it's disease, it's more of an autoimmune disorder that's targeting the thyroid. A lot of people, and this is mostly anecdotal, I haven't really seen published research on it. A lot of people with Hashimoto's who go on a low carb or keto diet get better, and they're able to decrease the medicine and eventually stop their thyroid medicine. But in terms of low carb and keto diets causing thyroid, what I see in the few people that appear to have fallen into this situation, it's not keto or low carb itself. I actually think they were under eating. So it was under eating, often combined with over exercising. And so, of course, as a protective mechanism, your body's going to slow your metabolic rate to prevent you from burning out, because I think especially in women have a lot of issues with food to begin with. And then they go on a ketogenic diet thinking this is the magical secret. And maybe their appetite is so suppressed that they under eat without even trying, and combine that, like we said earlier, with the fasting, where if they kind of fall on that fasting train and they literally become afraid to eat. So I really don't think it's low carb or keto per se. I think it's that they are either inadvertently or intentionally under eating for a long period of time. And of course, that's going to induce a thyroid issue.
Yeah, along those lines, basically, what we find is as people are losing weight, they need less thyroid hormone. So you might see a slight dip in the levels, but it's certainly not causing disease. And it's really interesting. Thank you for making the distinction between autoimmune thyroid disease and subclinical thyroid. Uh, and then I agree, in a sense, with we have diabetics, particularly type 1 or LADA patients, which is latent autoimmune diabetes in adults. Those are autoimmune diseases, just like thyroiditis. And
Yeah.
again, they seem to do quite well with a low carb approach.
Yeah. I will say another question for you, if you don't mind. I almost never see Graves' disease because if you have Graves' disease, you're probably not having difficulty losing weight, so you're not going to come to me for help. And I'm curious. I wonder if keto or low carb would be good for Graves, but I have no idea.
Yeah, well, believe it or not, the classic on Graves' disease is an overactive thyroid, and so
Yeah.
you think your metabolism is revved up, and certainly we can. Some of the patients don't have weight issues, but we've had patients with Graves' disease who, kind of have the same issue with weight. It may not be related to the thyroiditis, but
Yeah.
again, we think that cleaning up the diet, cutting out processed foods, and carbs and sugar can't hurt autoimmune disease.
That's kind of what I figured. I mean, no one's health ever got worse from not eating junk all the time.
Yeah. Well, look, Amy, it's fun talking to you because we're both in the trenches dealing with clients. And so this is fun having the interactive conversation going back and forth.
Yeah, and I look forward to Denver. I mean, it's been a couple of years, and I think this might be one of the first times I'm not actually talking about keto, which I mean, it's related. I think I like I said, I hope it helps some of the professionals in the audience, but it'll be interesting to not give a talk that's specifically about a keto diet.
Yeah, well, we're looking forward, Amy, and I know you've been in the audience at the conference, and like I said, we had met at the airport at the Metabolic Health Summit, and
Mhm.
I said, "Look, Amy, it's your turn. We want your passion up there on stage, and we want you to teach the audience and razzle dazzle them like you always do."
Well, now you've set the bar pretty high, so
So I always like to ask, what do you enjoy about coming to these events in person?
I it's going to sound lame, but really it is being with people in person, face to face, that I'm only seeing on Zoom or seeing on Twitter, seeing on email. It's just so, even before the pandemic, there's no substitute for like sitting down with somebody at a table, sharing a meal, or just sitting together for a talk. It's the whole energy is just different. It makes it when you meet people in person that you only ever knew online, then afterward, when you're back home, the interaction is totally different because you feel like you really know them in a different way, I think.
Somebody made a comment on Twitter the other day. Have you ever met these people in person? And the thread just went off, and you have to come to these conferences that, there's nothing like it. I mean, it's great to have this interview on Zoom today, but there's nothing like seeing you in person and having the interaction in person. And so
Yeah.
that's the whole purpose of these conferences, and just, getting back and to just share the passion with other like individuals.
Agree. And for me, someone who works from home, it's finally my excuse to put on real clothes and real outfits.
Well, you look lovely today, Amy, despite
Thank
not
you.
getting out much.
Thanks.
So, how can our audience find out more about you?
Let's see. Oh, my website is in desperate need of overhaul, but it's tuitnutrition.com, TUIT nutrition.com. That's my handle pretty much on all social media, Tuit Nutrition. That's Twitter, Instagram. My YouTube channel, you can just look up Amy Berger. And I work with Dr. Westman still at Adapt Your Life Academy. So that's adaptyourlifeacademy.com. And we actually have online courses about low carb and keto diets. We have one on cholesterol, food addiction. So lots of online content there.
That's great. And I actually took a couple minutes to look up what "tuit" meant.
Oh,
And real brief, can you explain that?
yeah. So when I was a kid, my mother had a wooden coin. It was, I don't know, the size of a silver dollar or so. And on one side, it said TUIT, to it. And on the other side, it said something like, you know, you're always putting things off until you get around to it. Oh, someday I'll get around to it. And this was a round to it. And literally, when I was trying to find a website domain, 15 years ago, everything was taken. Everything I could come up with was taken. And I said, you know, well, when are you going to get serious about health? Oh, I'll get to it someday. When are you going to get serious about weight loss? I'll get to it. Tuit Nutrition. Everybody thinks it's like intuitive eating, intuit. That would be a better explanation, but the real explanation is that little coin.
Now, the thing is, the circle to it blesses you in that you're meaning to get around to it, and you will, and you do. That's what the
Yeah.
coin does.
Yeah, because
apparently.
now you have you have the round to it. What's the excuse? You said I'll do it when I get around to it. Here's your round to it. What do you know?
I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks, Amy. And to our audience, if you want to find out more about our conference, please visit lowcarbconferences.com. So that's all for now, and we look forward to seeing you in February, Amy.
Yep. Thank you.